Hey, folks, this clip is brought to you by Farm Bureau Health Plans. For better coverage, better rates, and better service, go to fbhp.com/ATOZ. That is Farm Bureau Health Plans.
So yeah, not a ton to say about that game. Loved it for Joe. Loved that Joe had a big game. That was great. Got to see Nico. Didn't get to see him as much as I would probably like, but you still got to see him, and he looked fine. And I don't really understand why they played Joe all the way through the third quarter. Although he probably had his most fun drive on his final drive. And he did cartwheels into the end zone. I mean, he was just having a really good time out there, just smashing Vandy's head in.
It was really the best he had looked, kind of the most comfortable I felt like he had looked. He was making plays on the move, throwing on the move. If you could have got that a couple of times earlier in the year, maybe that Florida game, second half of that Alabama game, maybe some things play out a little different. And that was the thing with Milton is the game's so mental. I mean, the physical part is super important, obviously, but the mental part, I mean, Tom Brady wasn't the most athletic guy, didn't have the strongest arm. Joe Burrow kind of in that same, doesn't have the strongest arm, isn't the biggest guy, fastest guy out there. It's just so mental and making these decisions just like that. I mean, that was the thing Hendon Hooker was really good at. When I went back and I was watching some highlights from the Vandy game from last 2 years ago in 2021. And you could just tell the offense operated at such a faster pace, even not even snap to snap, just everything, just the way the whole thing just kind of operated, the decisions that were made at the line of scrimmage, the passes. And it wasn't a ton fast. I mean, it was just that half a second, right? Half a second makes all the difference. And it just felt like Milton was lacking just that half a second. I don't know if it was confidence or what, because when he played confident at times, like the Clemson game last season and this Vandy game, he looked like a different quarterback at times. And I think that's why going into this season, coming off of that Clemson game last year, you had these high expectations. Yeah, part of it was the players made it clear, like competing for the SEC East, getting to Atlanta was their goal. And I appreciate that. I respect that. We went through way too many years of the standards trying to drop. Butch Jones, even Jeremy Pruitt, they didn't want to kind of throw those expectations out there. And this team under Heupel hasn't shied away from that. And I appreciate that. I think that's the way you have to approach any season, no matter how your roster looks. I think still we thought that old Milton was gone, and that Milton from the Clemson game was going to be the guy we got for 12 games this season. And it just wasn't. And that's not fair to him, maybe, to put those expectations on him. I mean, ultimately, he did all he could do. Coaching staff believed that he was the guy. At the end of the day, he got them to 8-4, and there was a time when we would have killed for 8-4. And I'm not saying that we should settle for that by any means, but if we would have went into this season, the narrative being a little bit different, where we weren't talking about the SEC East, we talked about it as a rebuilding year, getting to Nico and kind of focusing on all the players that Tennessee lost. How do you think the reaction would be then? Like, would it be significantly different than it is right now, where half the fan base seems overly disappointed?
Yeah, I mean, the the entire feeling right now would be different if you, let's say, if it had gone 7-5 in year one. Is that, yeah, 7-5 in year one. It wasn't 6-6, 7-5.
Yeah, they lost the bowl game.
Yeah,
well,
and then
lost.
And then if you went 8-4 last year, and then this season 8-4 again, I mean, your expectations coming in, if last year had kind of been like this year more, I think it would have been fine, because you wouldn't have sniffed that, oh my goodness, we beat Alabama. We're, in the elite echelon, number one in the college football playoff. Like, Tennessee got back everything that it had in the 90s in that moment last season. And these fans that are old enough to remember that, they were there. You remember what that feels like. We all do if you're old enough. And so all of those expectations come flooding back in an instant. And so suddenly you're expecting it to be, year over year, that same 10-win thing. Well, this year ultimately was just not that. And it goes back to a few things. There's one legitimate excuse for some about this. And actually, in the comments, I wanted to get to some of the comments. There's a lot of comments so far. And actually, this is perfectly timed. Kenny just happened to comment this just now. He said, can y'all talk about injuries throughout the year that hindered this team? That's what I was about to say. There's one excuse that you could throw in, the injuries, and specifically at the wide receiver position. Because you had Brew go out, and then, to a much later time, I mean, you had Dante
Thornton.
Thornton. I was thinking Slaughter, Danico Slaughter, Dante Thornton. Anyway, Dante Thornton goes out at a later date. He wasn't out for as much this season as Brew. But like that, you were working with a set of wide receivers. Like Squirrel is being set in this position to be a number one wide receiver. Squirrel's not a number one wide receiver. Fun player. He's speedy. He's a just a really fun athlete.
He's still just a sophomore too. I mean, he's not
he's
a
young.
veteran guy.
And yeah, and you have some elements like that where you just, and now I think you're seeing, especially yesterday with Jalen Hyatt. Jalen Hyatt was an elite talent. He won the Biletnikoff Award, and everybody was like, well, he can just run fast. He can. No, he can't. It's not just running fast. He's turning out, he had his first 100+ yard game yesterday in the NFL. He's a good player. And, you don't have that this year. You don't have Cedric Tillman. You didn't have Brew McCoy for a huge chunk of the season. And that hurts a ton. That's the only fully legitimate excuse. The rest of it is this team just wasn't as good. Joe Milton's not as good as Hooker. And yeah, if you came in with those expectations that were in light of the last 15 years rather than in light of just last year, yes, I think we're walking away from the season going, we didn't win the SEC East, but hey, we could get 9 wins with this bowl game. Sweet. Now let's go into next year with our, number one QB in America, and let's see what happens. But instead, it's what I said happened during that post game on Saturday. Tons of people were just like mediocre, total letdown, failure, all these things, and you just go, we got to have a little bit of perspective here. You don't have to. This season was not a success. It was not a success. I don't think the players would say that it was a success. But you do have to keep it in perspective and say this team is still building. There's, a ton of talent coming in. The transfer portal, you can still pull from all of these things where this team's going to be completely different next year. And the potential is all still there. And I'm still very excited for the future despite the quote-unquote letdown of the season.
Yeah.
Farm Bureau Health Plans has been serving Tennesseans for over 75 years, and much has changed in Tennessee over the years, but some has stayed the same. Farm Bureau Health Plans has always valued personal relationships, especially when it comes to good health and good service. Plan on Farm Bureau Health Plans for health, dental, and vision. For better coverage, better rates, and better service, go to fbhp.com/ATOZ or walk into one of their 200+ locations across the state of Tennessee. That is fbhp.com/ATOZ. Farm Bureau Health Plans.
The further removed we are from it, and really, I kind of started thinking about this going into the Vandy game towards the end of the week. You think it's less than 3 years removed from everything that happened with Jeremy Pruitt. That that was 3 years ago next month in December when all that kind of broke about the NCAA violations, the recruiting investigation. All those guys hit the portal in January following that. Lost so many players there that class has never been that class right there has never been touched, right? Like you've added a few portal players, you've kept some super seniors, you've signed guys and brought them in. So you've got a lot of youth, a lot of older guys, and then you have this void in the middle of the roster that's just they weren't there to pick up the slack when these injuries happen. Really what should be the most talented part of your roster, redshirt sophomores, juniors, they're just not there. You had, I think, 6 juniors on this team, not counting walk-ons. That was just that depth, and that part of your roster was depleted. And when you think about the super seniors, yes, it's great to have that experience. They can be an extremely important part of your team. Tennessee is relying on a lot of those guys. Well, let's be honest. Like, if you're a super senior, you're a COVID senior, whatever you want to call it, if you were really, really good, elite SEC player, you're not sticking around. You're going to the NFL. I mean, Cade Mays didn't even stick around, went 6th round and can barely get on the field right now. Most of these guys were going. The Jalen Hyatts, I mean, he wasn't sticking around another season where, because he's that talented. He didn't need to stick around for another season. Most of the guys that stick around, they're probably going to be late round NFL draft picks, so they're not getting drafted at all. So, yeah, you got experience, but it's not elite talent there. So much of the elite high-end talent on this roster is really young, really young. Some of the players that get Heupel signed in 2022 and 2023 that you expect to contribute, just all that combined with the injuries, and then the quarterback play wasn't elite. Like, we've beat a dead horse with that, but Joe Milton was average, middle-of-the-road SEC quarterback at best. You put all that together, 8-4, 9-3, that was probably the ceiling for what this team was working with, to be honest.
Well, I saw some talk, too, that, all of the players that were the best players on this team were guys from the Pruitt era, and Heupel, none of Heupel's guys have been productive, and we don't even know if he can develop players. And there's a little bit of credence to that. But I would put it to that exact point. The guys that Heupel has brought in at their oldest would be from that first recruiting class, which is hopefully going to be his worst.
What, 2021?
Yes.
And really, that's mostly, he really didn't even get to sign most of those guys. Most of those guys were already signed by the time he took, 2022 was his first real class. And
so, they're only going to be 2 years in. It's going to be a Squirrel White. It's going to be says
James Pierce.
Anybody? Hello? Some of that young talent has been good. Now, at cornerback, that could certainly be debated because it just seemed like they've stuck so hard line with seniority at that position. So we almost don't even know what the young guys can do at that position.
Yeah, that's a Tim Baines thing.
And that's a whole other conversation that honestly I think we could have here. But, I just think that that's a little overblown at the moment. We get through next year, and a lot more of Heupel's players are playing a lot more regularly, and it just looks like there's been no development at all, and they're just not coming along, and these guys aren't progressing. Okay, we can have that conversation.
I don't understand that conversation.
At this point, I don't get it.
Velus Jones didn't do much under Jeremy SEC talent. They're all these schools that aren't Georgia and Alabama. They're pretty much chasing the same guys. Most of these guys have offers from all the other SEC schools, the South Carolinas, Missouris, Kentuckys, Floridas. They're all going after the same guys, same caliber of talent. So I think we've seen some development. That's the reason Darnell Wright's in the NFL. Darnell Wright told the Chicago Tribune at one point he was considering giving up football before Heupel's staff arrived. Like, he just didn't – he wasn't developing under Pruitt. That changed under Heupel. He was a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. That doesn't happen without Josh Heupel and his staff coming to Tennessee. Who knows what happens if Pruitt stays? Maybe he leaves, goes to the portal, gives up football. I don't know. He's the one that, kind of said that was on his mind. So I don't buy into this development thing. I think that's just kind of I don't know. There's a lot of detractors out there, cynics, naysayers.
Yeah, it feels like a panic thing where people are just like, oh, the season didn't go how we wanted. There has to be something deeply wrong. I think you just ran into it. It was, in reality, it was a rebuilding year and not a building on what you had last year, which I think everybody was really wanting it to be, including me. I predicted 11-1 before the season. You wanted it to be building on last year rather than rebuilding from losing a bunch of guys off of a team that was really special. And so you take that into consideration, hindsight 2020. And yeah, this year, I will say this year was a letdown, but only in light of last year. And I actually think a big part of that letdown came in from there being injuries and some circumstances that Tennessee couldn't control. Losing Brew McCoy, just brutal. He's the guy that you needed, Joe, to lean on, and he didn't have that guy. And I think it was really obvious in some spots this season where he just, he just couldn't trust the guys he was throwing to. Heupel couldn't trust the guys that Milton was throwing to. And in turn, Heupel couldn't trust Milton. And you were already not trusting Milton fully because of his more limited skill set compared to Hooker. And that's just a bad formula. You add all of that together, And that's not where Napier by the game is just looking worse and worse. And you look at that and you go, oh, how did we let that happen? Why? And at that point, you had more of the team healthy and you were in a better spot, and you still, not only did you not win, you got run off the field. And there were some moments here. The way you lost some games really made this season hurt, and some stuff like that, and the way that some things went. I mean, it's a letdown. It's a letdown of a season, while at the same time, it can be two things at once. Season was a letdown. Also, we got to have a little perspective and say we would have been falling over ourselves to have an 8-4 season 3 years ago. So it's both of those at the same time, and here we are.